What up, everybody? Welcome to the Project Songbird podcast. Project Songbird exists to help a community of songwriters to craft their stories with excellence. We want to equip you with all of the knowledge and the information necessary for you to excel in your artistry, and this podcast will be the main way we do that. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Okay, this is episode 2 of our series, Don't Get Ripped Off. In episode 1, we talked about producers, what a producer is, what to look for in a producer, some things that should give you a little bit of caution, some things that should help you move forward with picking a producer. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about mix and mastering engineers. We're going to lump them together, and we'll get into why we lump them together in the end. Usually, most projects have a different producer than a mixing and mastering engineer. That's not always true, but I feel like it's most of the time true. There are a lot of producers out there that try to throw in free mixing and mastering at the end of their project, and I'm just here to say it's usually never free. It's built into the cost, just like free shipping. If you see something that's $20 in free shipping, they calculated that in the cost of the product.
Except it's way more than $20.
Except for it's way more than $20. Also, I will say, I think producers are great because they spend so much of their time on their craft. I think mixing and mastering engineers are because they spend so much time on their craft. So they're kind of specialists. And so why it usually isn't the best idea to hire one for both is you want a specialist on each side of this equation. You usually get your best product. So I say all that to let you know you have freedom as an artist to do whatever you want, but just our experience.
Yes, there are rare birds out there that can do both really, really well, equally as well as somebody who's just specializes in producing and just specializes in mixing and mastering, but you likely won't find them.
Or they'll charge a ton.
Or they'll charge a ton and it'll be the same price as just going to two different people. Anyway.
So disclaimer, done.
Yes.
In this episode, because we're talking about mixing and mastering engineer, this is typically the person that takes all of the tracks that were recorded and put together, and basically, we use the word mix, they mix them together against each other to give a complete full picture of the song in the end. And so a producer hands off the tracks to a mixing and mastering engineer, and then they kind of run with the project from there with help from the producer and the artist. We'll get into that process. If you're looking for specifically red flags on how to hire a mixing and mastering engineer, because you have to hire one on your own, refer to our last episode. All the red flags apply. Literally all of them. So just substitute the word mixing mastering engineer for producer and you're golden. In this one, we wanted to really focus on how to get the most out of a mixing and mastering engineer. If you do need to hire one, most people start with through their producer. Your producer knows the vision of the song. And if you followed our advice in episode 1 of this series, you've hopefully hired a really good producer. And therefore, they should have a great mixing and mastering engineer in mind to get your project to the end. The other place you can ask is other artists. A lot of other artists, again, will have different working relationships, and some of them find people that they love. There's specifically artists that I work with that work with a variety of producers, but then have me mix for all those producers. There's some artists that work with just one producer, and that one producer likes working with me. And there's other times they work with a producer and that producer says, hey, I'm only going to work with you if you go through my process. You know, again, if you're going to hire someone, you got to respect their process. If you don't like that, don't hire them.
What do you mean by process?
Like some producers are like, hey, you're only going to work with me if you use my mix engineer.
Oh, speaking of the artist. I thought they were saying to you.
No, speaking to the artist.
Okay, I was like, wait. No, okay.
I mean, you might get that too. But
sense.
If you're going to work with someone, you're going to play by their rules. So you got to figure all that out. But usually producers have a really great mixing and mastering engineer in mind. It's a very symbiotic relationship.
Yes. So, they're collaborating with one another.
So they should know exactly who to work with. So now getting into the mix, something that the artist and the producer should have already worked on is a clear vision for the song. So when we talk a clear vision, we're talking like specifics of the genre, specifics of how things are going to play out in the end and how they really want to sound. Like you mentioned in our first episode, that can be pretty tricky, but it's a process you work through. At this stage, you should be able to hand a clear vision to a mixing and mastering engineer. If you can't, you messed up earlier in the process. And it's probably not in a good spot. I've definitely gotten songs that I've gone through a producer that I feel like they still really didn't know what they want. And it's just hard to win because a mixing engineer has to make a lot of decisions. a lot of very little decisions
Totally.
that add up to a big picture.
Yeah.
And so if I don't have good information going in, I'm just going to make whatever decisions I think.
Yeah.
So that's kind of hard.
And I think the trap for a lot of artists is because they're not technically knowledgeable about how mixing and mastering works and how sonically things come together. They think that mixing is a little bit more abstract than it actually is, when it's actually quite technical and it has to be done very, very intentionally.
Yeah.
So all of music, all of art, yes, is very subjective, but there are, going back to the vision piece, when you have a vision, there is a way, a specific way somebody's going to want to go about that vision.
Yep.
And so it cannot be abstract. We're not just trying to make something sonically just gel. It is like, what is going to go with your vision?
Yep.
All of my decisions are going to come under that.
Yep.
If you have no vision, I'm just going to do likely random things and like try stuff that you might not like as an engineer.
Yep. And sometimes visions can conflict.
Yes.
So I think one of the best examples is like, if you have Adele singing, what part of the mix should be the most prominent, important part? It's her voice. She's known for her voice.
Yeah.
Because of that, other parts of the mix are not going to shine the same.
Yeah.
You can't have everything at a 10 out of 10 shining in the most prominent.
Right.
That's what makes music so fun, is it's this contrast between some things that are taking front stage and some things that are supporting that.
Yeah.
And so you can't say, I want the drums to be huge, the guitars to be huge, the voice to be huge. I want everything to be huge. It's like
something's got to give.
Something's got to give.
Yeah. And again, that changes from genre to genre.
Yeah.
Where, you have to decide what's going to be prominent.
Yeah.
What instruments are going to win.
Yep.
And some, it doesn't just have to be one. It could be one or two. But yeah, they can't all win.
Yeah.
I'll go back to, I want to say this, like, the reason why it's important to, I think why we think it's important to go to somebody that specializes in mixing engineering is because at least for me as a producer, like you and the artist have just finished and accomplished a really cool thing. Like you have created beautiful, amazing tracks.
Yep.
Usually a producer is capable of at least making a producer mix, which is just a basic demo mix.
Demo mix, yep.
Should never be released.
Yep.
It's not good enough to be released. But it is something that can communicate like, okay, like this is the general idea of like where I want to go mix-wise with the song. And so you've just accomplished something. You finished that stage of the song in the song making process. And so now I'm like, okay, like the mixing engineer is going to take this and make this amazing. Me as the producer, and certainly them as the artist, would not want to put a cap on the quality of the song by trying to do it ourselves or like make something. So I say that I want to go back to that to stress how important it is to go to a mixing engineer who can do really well with it, because they're taking your what I would consider to be a raw product of musicality and making it really nice and beautiful and polished. That's the best way I can describe that philosophically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you even experienced that when we first started working together years ago.
Yes.
It would like took you a second to hand off mixing to me.
Yes.
Like we became friends, and then you were like, yeah, I kind of want to do it all myself. And then you started handing it over to me and you're like, I like that so much better. Like I'd rather you bring it to the finish line.
Yeah.
And get a better product. I also don't have to worry about it.
Yes.
Like I just get to give you some vision, and now you are the one who actually has to make it work. So,
because then I can put all of my creative capital towards instruments, programming, the recording with the vocalist, all the things.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I
I think another thing with vision is sometimes artists like songs, but they don't like the mix.
Yes.
So one of my best examples of this is working with an artist named Jonathan Ogden, amazing artist out in the UK. And he sent me a song and he said, yeah, here's a song. Here's everything. Just go for it. I was like, hey, like, do you have any references for me? Because I love a good mix reference. I love some good vision. It helps me make a lot of decisions.
Right.
And he actually got back to me and said, hey, I listened to a couple songs after you asked, and I realized I didn't like the mixes of any of the songs that I liked for this project.
For sure.
And so he's like, so I don't have anything for you.
Yeah.
What was really fun for me is I actually just asked him, I was like, hey, here's kind of what I'm thinking. I'm going to run with it.
Yeah.
And he ended up loving where we landed on it, which is kind of really fun.
As in, what did you send him mixed references of your own, or you just sent him your first mix?
I just sent him
collab?
kind of like my thoughts of the vision for the song.
Okay, cool.
And then I was like, I'm just going to run this direction. It's very different than your demo mix.
Yeah.
So I just felt like because he didn't really know even when he sent me the demo mix,
Yeah.
he would like that. And it worked out really, really, really
For
well.
sure.
He had a lot of trust to me, which I'm very grateful for.
Yeah.
But I think it highlights this thing that sometimes we like songs, but we don't like the mix. I think
Absolutely.
another example we talk about all the time, and I'm not trying to hate on any genre of music, but a lot of live worship mixes from our standpoint just aren't great. Yeah. They're not big. They're not clear.
Yeah.
They're not very exciting. I think they get away with it because there's not a lot of really great mixes out there in that genre.
Yeah.
I also think they're trying to accomplish something very specific of like feeling like you're in the room.
That's what I was just going to say.
So there's some of that at play too. So this isn't like, again, this is a little subjective, but we've just realized when you hold up those mixes against like really good modern pop mixes, they're like nowhere even close.
Nowhere even close.
So
not even just pop, many other genres.
Many other genres, yeah. And I think a lot of genres too, like not to get off too much on a tangent, have come together, like merged.
Yes.
Like back in the day, if you're like listening to rock and roll in the 80s, you'd pop a CD in your car and you know, you're chilling, you're loving this. You're not listening to a rock song next to a hip hop song.
Yeah.
So all music has actually kind of converged a lot more in style because now we listen to music on streaming and it's one after another. So it's like, oh man, you don't want your song to sound so far one way and then play next to next. Now you might, as an artist, commit to that, and that's fine. But again, that's having that vision of like, hey, I'm comfortable with it being very different. I'm comfortable with it not stacking against what people are listening to before.
I have learned the hard way what Jonathan Ogden learned with you by sending you references, you executing what I asked you to do, and then I'm like, ooh, I actually don't like this for my song.
Yeah.
Like I remember for one of my songs, I sent you a Jacob Collier reference.
Yep.
Love him.
Yep.
He doesn't have the best mixes on a lot of his songs.
Or not the mix that you wanted to come to life on your song.
Yeah, let's say that.
Yeah.
And I remember sending one of my favorite songs of all time by him, All I Need.
Yeah.
Love it. But it was not, it was in the same genre. It wasn't the mix I was looking for.
Yeah.
And so I think that stifled the process a little bit. So
we've also worked with artists that have sent mixes from like the 70s.
Yeah. Yes.
But they don't want it to actually be mixed like that.
Yes.
They just loved that song.
It's iconic to them.
Yeah. Which is awesome.
Right.
Love that song. But it's like, when I actually made your drums sound like that and your voice sound like that, and I mixed it tonally like that song, you weren't happy.
Right.
And so again, I think that's where it's just good to have some intentionality when you listen to some songs, like, oh, I like that mix.
Totally.
I like how full that sounds. I like the blend of the instruments.
Yeah.
I like the style of the effects. And I think also with your vision, it's okay to even try to ask like, hey, I really like the way the vocals sound here.
Totally.
I like the way the drums sound here. You know, what does this sound like? Sometimes you can piece those things together and it works well. Sometimes it doesn't, like, and you can work that process out. But it's just good to start getting some kind of language around it.
Yeah. And I think your language, when you reference stuff like that, like you've worked with people sometimes where they're like, I want the drums to be bigger. And then they reference the 70s mix. And you're like, that doesn't sound bigger than what I already have big, now. And so you have to really test that. But yeah. Language is super important too.
Language is important.
I think a lot of artists, again, we are highly aware of the fact that you don't know how to put language to your thoughts and your feelings. And so that's just something I think there's a lot of anxiety for artists around that of like, I don't want to seem like I don't know what I'm doing. It's like you've hired us because we know you don't know what you're doing.
We know you don't know. Yeah.
And so we want to coach you through that. I think the way that you help put language to what you're saying is just listening to your producer as they talk to a mix engineer. There are specific words, I think, that do mean specific things that seem abstract, but also they translate into legitimate action. So, for example, language, just a thought, like language that I often use to communicate to you different frequencies for a mix or like whatever. I usually say I'd like this mix to be brighter, or I'd like this vocal to be brighter, or I'd like it to be darker. Brighter means there's a lot of higher end frequencies, so it's going to sound crispier, or like there's a little bit more of a bite, and even the words I'm using right now, like those are specific words.
People have used the word sharper, which I think is
sharp.
Yeah. And I know in music we use sharper for like notes, but they're just saying like it feels sharp.
Yes, and that can have a positive or negative connotation to it. Like you can say this sounds too sharp, or it's not sharp or bright enough.
Yeah.
But you have to be very clear with what you're saying. So there are specific words that like I've only learned through just working with people and hearing them say that and seeing how it translates into what I want them to do.
Yeah.
But you a lot of artists, they'll use words that mean nothing at all.
Yeah.
And so then we have to dissect. So I think learning specific language to put thoughts into tangible action for the mixing engineer is super important too.
Yeah, and that comes with experience.
Yes.
So it's not something you can just like Google and figure out.
No.
I think asking your producer, getting some experience, I think is really helpful. What's fun about that is I have some friends and they do that with coffee now. So they're like music nerds, but they'll use the same music terms.
the words.
Yeah, so they'll say like, oh, this is like a really bright coffee.
That's funny.
Or like this is like a warm coffee.
Yeah.
You know, you can like describe it that way.
But that's a perfect example. Like
it is.
I love coffee, and even like using tasting notes to describe like, oh, this coffee tastes too burnt. It's like I know exactly what this means. Or it tastes too watery, you know, that there's a different.
But you had to try it with some friends
to know,
like talk about it. Yep. To know.
Compare it to other coffees.
Yep.
So that's a really interesting parallel. Yeah. That's exactly the same thing.
Yep.
Because it is subjective.
Yep.
But there is language that can be put to, and people might disagree with your language too. Yep. That's another thought is like, what might be too bright to you, or what might be too bright to me is not too bright to you. Yep. Which you and I we've had that tension before of like, I think this is too bright. And you're like, I could make this way brighter if I wanted to.
Yeah.
So
I think it's more of like brighter, warmer.
Yes.
It's not just bright, not just warm.
Right.
We're going in a direction.
Yes. It's a spectrum, if you will.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Something you say, which I think is great to know too, is mix one is never it.
Yes.
I think a lot of times artists might get mix one and they get really scared.
Yeah.
Like, oh no.
Right.
This is not the song I wanted. And they panic.
Yeah.
And it's like they throw everything at mix one of like, I don't like this song. Like it feels like that's the language.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like, well, hold up. I think if we make a couple small tweaks, it'll get really close to your vision. Mm-hmm. But again, I had to make a lot of decisions to get here by myself. I need you to help me recalibrate those decisions. Even changing one big thing might like change the whole mix. Like if, for example, if a vocal is too loud, I might internalize that as the guitars aren't loud enough. Yep. The drums aren't loud enough. But it's like, actually, it may just be that the vocal needs to come down and all of your problems that you think are in your head can be fixed. Yep.
I think I got to meet a producer out in Nashville. His name is Ben Shive. He's worked with like Colony House and Stephen Curtis Chapman and all them. And he made a really interesting kind of like analogy for how artists often feel when it comes to producer and mix like drafts. Mm-hmm. He said, when you guys get like a mix one and you don't like it, you react as if your car is on the side of the road bursting up in flames on fire and there's nothing you can do about it. Yeah. When really it's more like you're in a dark room by yourself. It's a little anxiety inducing if you're in a dark room, you don't know why you're there. But you're feeling the walls for light switches, trying to turn the right light on. Yep. And once it comes on, it's like, oh, okay, it's clicking now. Yep. Which is like, those two things have nothing to do with each other, but the feeling that you have in both of those moments is similar, and one is less drastic than the other. But the reality is, what we're trying to communicate is that nothing is really not, like, while you're in the process of making the song, nothing is not salvageable. There's things that can be done is what you need to know. Yep. You need to try new things. Yep. And
sometimes, like you said, small changes make a big difference. I think a great example is like if you want the vocals to be louder and you ask for the vocals to be louder and they get louder, in turn, everything gets smaller. Yes. Because now you have a bigger contrast between the volume of the vocals versus the band. Mm-hmm. So then you might come back and be like, well, why does the band sound so small? And it's like, okay, there's a give and a take here. Right. And so I think a big part of this process too is working with the mix engineer who's willing to go along that journey with you. Yeah. And it help explain some things to you like, hey, I can make that change. As I make this change, be listening to this. Yes. Because there's always a give and take. Mm-hmm. As I make something bigger, something else is going to feel smaller. Yeah. As I cut certain frequencies, other things are going to shine through and you might lose something that you really like. So, and I think that's okay. That's why it's a very technical skill. Yeah. Because there's a lot of give and take between all of these individual elements. Totally. And I can make a couple of very small changes that an artist asks for, and then they feel like the mix is wildly different. And it's like, I just made a couple small changes. They just all cascade on top of each other to make a bigger picture. Totally. All of this is also assuming that you've found a really good producer as well. That again will work really well with the audio engineer. Yeah. Because
some of the problems you might be experiencing in the mix phase actually had a lot to do with the production.
Yep.
Where if the producer wasn't necessarily considering the mix and the decisions that the mix engineer would have to make.
Yep.
It's like, man, a lot of things can conflict. Like
Yep.
if I'm trying to make a singer-songwriter song, like an acoustic song, it's like I could any one of these things could work. Like I have to if I have an acoustic guitar and a piano, they could work together, but they have to be played in tandem with one another in a way that complements one another. They can't just be doing whatever they want.
Yeah.
Or one has to win. And so if I decide to just have an acoustic guitar player and a piano player just do whatever they want, it's like you're like struggling to try to figure out like which one is even supposed to be the main instrument. Are they both supposed to be the main instrument? And now I'm frustrated with you as the producer because I'm like, why are they not both in? It's like they don't work together.
Yeah.
So that's tough too.
Yep. Yeah. It's fun.
Yeah.
I know even for like our relationship, I think it's fair to say like we both made each other a lot better. Yeah. And I think that's what you want in a producer and a mix engineer. Because I know there's times that like I would push back on you and be like, hey, the way you produce that bass doesn't sit well in the mix. Yep. Like I'm going to try to make a lot of changes on my end. But if you got better at that, it's going to make the mix better.
Totally.
And then I think like over the years, like you've taken all that feedback to heart. And that's why you grow as a producer.
Yeah.
And so you keep getting better at giving me tracks that are like way closer and easier to mix.
Yeah.
And then I also keep getting better at like mixing and figuring out your vision right away.
Yeah.
So there's this growth curve that happens.
Absolutely.
I also think it's fair to say, like, if you're working with a good producer, the mix shouldn't be wildly, wildly different.
Absolutely.
Like the better the tracks get produced, the less heavy changes the mixing engineer has to do. And if you're looking for heavy changes in the mix stage, you have some problems.
Yeah.
So just kind of something to help people's expectations be managed.
Totally.
For their average artist, if you heard the difference between like what the producer put together and what the mix engineer made for like some of the top songs in the world,
right,
most artists wouldn't hear much of a difference between them.
Yeah.
But a lot of artists then hand off pretty poorly produced songs to mix engineers and expect them to make it amazing.
Yes.
That's just not going to happen.
Not going to happen.
Yeah. So it's just what we have to work with.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about the difference between a mix engineer and a mastering engineer. It's something I think a lot of people talk about and are confused about, especially a lot of artists that just haven't done this a lot. I'm going to give you kind of my thoughts. There's no hard and fast rules.
Yeah.
But what used to happen is way back in the day, it was a very separate process.
Yes.
All the equipment used to mix was different than all the equipment used to print that on vinyl. And so you had a master at printing it on vinyl. Yeah. I know how to make this vinyl sound great. I know how to make all the grooves right and the right speed and how to flip it at the right time. And like I'm a master of that craft. And then you have a master mix engineer.
Yeah.
And they're really great at like capturing everything to tape, like you said, where to put the microphones, where that is a separate process. It's not separate anymore. It doesn't have to be. We have technology. Most people actually mix and master on their computer.
Right.
We have amazing tools. We're going to get into the difference between analog and computer later, but we have some amazing tools. And so it's possible to do the whole process in one.
Yeah.
That being said, you can for sure hire a mixing engineer who also masters.
Yeah.
I do that. I feel like I work really hard to get the vision from the artist. And so I master it in a way that complements my mix and gets them to their final vision.
Yeah.
I've had experiences where I've handed off my mixes to other mastering engineers, and I feel like they actually took steps backwards from what the artist wanted,
right,
which is very hard. I've also had other times where I feel like the mastering engineer handled the mix really well.
Yeah.
So this is not a hard and fast rule. Some people value having a second person in the process. I've seen it work well.
Yeah.
I've seen it not work well.
Yeah.
I think this just comes down to knowing who you have. If you like the mix, the masters you get from your mix engineer that masters, you're probably fine.
Yeah.
I also think too, sometimes people assume like, oh, I got this thing from them, but I really didn't like the way the guitar sounded. I need a new mastering engineer. It's like, no, that gets solved in mixing.
Right.
Mixing is all the tracks together. A mastering engineer just gets one track and they apply effects to the track as a whole. So everything they do is going to affect everything as a whole. So they can't just raise or lower the volume of one thing or change the sound of just one element. In the end, I also think a mastering engineer, a good master should translate across multiple devices.
Yeah.
It should be able to be sounding great in headphones, like the over the ear ones, but the earbuds. It should be able to sound good on computers,
Mhm.
on like car speakers. So a good master translates multiple places. So
Yeah.
that would be a good thing. If you feel like your mixes aren't translating well across places, it's probably like in the mastering stage.
Totally.
Now, there's also times as a mastering engineer, I've fixed problems from other mix engineers.
Yeah.
I don't love doing that. That's usually a sign to me that you should get a different mix engineer or communicate with them differently.
And it's not ideal that you have to do that.
It's not ideal that I have to do
Not-
that, but
not
it's
even
something
close.
that I have done.
Yes.
Where I've gotten a track and I'm like, I don't think the artist loves the way their voice sounds in this. I'm going to do a little bit heavier EQing and mastering than I normally do to try to fix something.
Mhm.
But again, I'm trying to fix a problem that we could not have.
Right.
And you'll get a better product in the end.
Totally.
So speaking on that, I think another question people have is like the difference between analog gear and in the box.
Can I speak something before you get to that?
Sure.
I think what we said about the difference between a producer mix and then the engineer mix, like that it shouldn't be a whole like drastically different. It's especially true in the stage from mixing to mastering,
Yes. Yep.
where it shouldn't be a whole lot different.
No.
Like you should be. It's this weird paradox of it matters and it doesn't, because at the end of the day, like when you finish the mix, you should be really, really happy with how it sounds already.
Yep.
But it's still not presentable yet.
Yep.
And it still, I promise you, will not compete with the other songs you hear on Spotify.
Yeah.
So in one sense, it's like it really does matter. And at the same time, it's like I shouldn't even say it doesn't matter. In one sense, you should notice the difference. And in another sense, you shouldn't.
I think if it's good, I think that's the tension.
That's what we're trying to say.
If it's good, it's not that big of a difference.
Right.
It's still an important difference.
Yes.
But it's not a big difference.
And so the difference you should be noticing now, this is it's really interesting because again, we do this a different way, and anything can be done any kind of way. There's no pigeonholing rule strategy, but you and I just do this in a way of like, you just send me the mix and the master together. Yes. I'm not listening. I could ask for this. Yeah. I'm not listening to the mix itself before I'm listening to the master, because the function. But you could do it. You could do it differently, especially, and you'll have to do it differently if you have a mixing engineer.
Yeah, if you have two engineers, you don't have the luxury to do this.
Yes. But the way we do it is that I'm just hearing the final product as it is, not the two separate stages.
Yep. Because in my mind, that's what matters.
Yes.
The final product.
Right.
And it's really hard to get artists to love an unmastered mix.
Right.
So I'm like, I'll take that stage out.
Yeah.
I'm going to send back my mixes to you with my mastering process already on them.
Yes.
So that you know exactly what you're getting in the end.
And even if I know somebody who does a mixing engineering, but they don't master the song, they're still going to put a limiter on it to make it at least remotely presentable to you. Yeah. And so I think as an artist, the thing you should be listening for is one, volume wise, is this competing with other songs that I'm listening to? That's the chief goal.
If it's been mastered.
If it's been, specifically for mastering.
Yeah.
Does this compete volume wise? Sonically, does it feel polished? And I know that's an abstract term, but does it feel complete? Does it feel like
a final product?
Yeah. Is everything gelling together? Yeah. So mastering, think of mixing engineering as generally as like, we're in the nitty gritty. We're trying to make things individually, like instruments individually sound together and yet complement one another really well. And then mastering is like the overall umbrella sonics of the song. How is it coming together as a whole? Is that a good way to describe that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
volume is so tricky. I could talk for a long time about volume. Tricky. I'm not going to. Yeah. But just for an artist to remember, louder is not always better.
True.
And you get penalized in a lot of places for your mixes being too loud.
What does penalized mean?
So if you upload mixes to Spotify or Apple Music, but they call it like your not your PCARMS. They do it off the LUFS scale. There's all these different scales.
Right.
It's so nerdy. Mm-hmm. There's so much to it. But basically, if they perceive that there's not enough dynamic range between the quietest and the loudest parts of your song, they will actually turn down your mixes once you upload them. Yeah. And it can be by a significant amount. So I've had examples where like I've mastered a track and another engineer's mastered a track and an artist has gone with the other mastering engineer.
Just because it was louder.
Just because it was louder when they were listening, when they were A-Bing. But the problem is when they uploaded it to the internet drastically turned their mix down to where now their mix actually sounds like compressed and squashed.
Right.
So they lost the benefit of being loud, and they just got the negative aspects of limiting, which is less dynamic. So all that to be said, this is where you really should lean into your producer.
Yes.
And really trust them.
Right.
And also, hopefully, you're working with a good mixing and mastering engineer that knows how to make songs translate well across different services.
Absolutely.
It's a tricky game. I can get super nerdy. I don't think most people care about that, though.
No.
You just want your music to sound great on Spotify and Apple Music and all the places people listen.
Yeah.
So,
maybe we'll take another episode to get nerdy. But not right now.
Maybe. If they want it.
Yeah.
Another thing to talk about is analog versus in the box, is what you say.
Yeah.
Analog is a physical piece of gear that you are going through that can change the sound, usually with knobs and buttons and different things where you can change settings.
Yeah.
In the box means you're using digital recreations of these analog gear.
Yeah.
So, for instance, someone takes this analog gear and they figured out how to make software that looks just like it and responds very similarly. And we have access to that on our computers.
Yes.
I don't think there's inherently anything better or worse about either of those methods. We are at the point of history with technology where, in my opinion, in the box is just as good as analog.
Yeah.
Especially for how we're mostly listening and experiencing music.
Totally.
No one can tell me what songs on the top 40 playlist were analog and which ones were in the box.
Right.
You'd be absolutely shocked at some of the songs that are just mixed on a laptop.
Yep.
It's just the way it is. There's a lot more that goes into the skill than the gear. So all that said, I just wouldn't be overly concerned that mixes are going through analog gear or not. And I wouldn't make a decision based on that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's all I'll say about that. I think a couple of like ending points. You don't want to work with anybody that nickel and dimes you.
Yes.
So you don't want to work with someone that anytime you ask for any change, they're just charging you money for that.
They should, if they're a person of integrity, they'll tell you how much you're paying for at the beginning.
Yes. And they're going to hopefully hold that standard. Now, if you're going to ask for 100 mix revisions, there's going to be a limit to where it's like, hey, I've put in way more time.
Yes.
And so that's going to be like a separate conversation later, but you shouldn't feel nickel and dimed along the way.
Right.
There are some things that like if you add in different stages, like for a producer, if someone's like, hey, I want to add electric guitar now, there's going to be a conversation of like, hey,
pay an electric guitarist.
We're going to have to pay an electric guitarist. That makes a lot of sense. But it's not like, hey, I want to make one small change to the mix for another version. I shouldn't be charging you for a whole nother mix for that or anything remotely like that. Also, a lot of artists want different things at the end of the process for like how they want their tracks delivered. These are called deliverables.
Yes.
Do you want just a track? Do you want an instrumental track with your vocal track? Do you also want all of the stems, which when we say stems, we say groupings of tracks. So like this could be like a track that's just the drums.
Yeah.
It's just nice to ask for those things up front. Just say, hey, I'm going to be asking for the stems and an instrumental at the end, just so we know. What's not fun is when you get asked like 6 months to a year later. Yeah. And then a mixing engineer has to try to find those projects. And sometimes they might not even have them. Yeah. Or there might be parts of them that are like plugins get updated and all that. And there's issues with getting right back to the original thing. So try to get all your deliverables together is really good. So having a clear vision for what deliverables you want. But yeah, that's a lot of stuff you want to look for on how to get the most out of your mixing engineer. Like I said, we talked about red flags in our last episode. All those still apply. If you want to work with someone who loves to mix, I love to mix. I take it very seriously. Again, we're not just trying to like shamelessly plug. We want to give you guys information to make the best decisions you can make. Yeah. But we also just want you to know, like, we care deeply about this stuff. That's why we're doing this. So if you're listening and you're like, I want to make music, hopefully through all this, you'll feel like, oh, they're actually living by the things that they're saying. I can trust that. Yeah. That's what we want for artists. Totally. We want great mixes, great songwriting, great production, and we want people to be really happy with the art they put out. Yeah. Dude, mixing is so fun. Mixing is such an art. And I appreciate what you do. Thanks, man. Makes me very happy. Hopefully it makes other people happy too. Hopefully. We'll find out. Yeah. All right. Ciao. No.